Forgiveness is a tricky thing to come by, especially in sports. Fans don't tend to be forgiving of mistakes, of missed shots, or poor decisions. They tend to hold grudges over bad breakups, clinging onto the idea of loyalty in a professional game, to the point where stands exist now, a culture created by a deep desire to try and get closer to athletes while feeling like you, the stan, understand their specific point of view. Almost none of that highly online behavior existed when Vince Carter was a Toronto Raptor, but boy was there still tons of bad blood. The city of Toronto and its basketball fans for over a decade held contempt for their once beloved superstar.
From North Carolina, 6'6" guard number 15, Vince Carter.
But now, 20 years later, the Raptors are honoring Carter significantly by making him the first player to have his jersey retired. Number 15 is going up in the Raptors, and while most have learned to forgive, forget, and embrace, there are people out there who are still on the fence. But by not forgiving Carter, you are depriving yourself of the opportunity to celebrate something genuinely great, and you're clinging on to a stigma that this franchise desperately wants to move past. So let me convince you in this film. It's important to contextualize the NBA in 1998 when Carter first entered the league. The league was in a precarious position, having just lost its biggest cash cow in Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls. Over the last decade, they had added 6 expansion franchises that only helped dilute the pool of talent a bit more, and 2 of those teams were north of the border in Canada, the NBA's first venture outside of the United States. The league was in experimentation mode, as they were set to reach the millennium, and yet they didn't have their brightest star to help usher them into that new unknown. Jordan's absence created a void, but it also created expectations for any young, exciting player with ridiculous athleticism who entered the league. A crop of players in that era were deemed the next Michael Jordan, and Carter might have been the best example. Like his airness, Carter was a high-flying, multi-year star who dominated at the University of North Carolina. There's pressure anytime you enter the league as a top 5 pick, but being compared to the GOATs? Add to the fact that Carter was going to play in Toronto of all places, a city and country that had only been introduced to the NBA 3 years prior, a sports town that was dominated in the winter by its love for hockey and the Toronto Maple Leafs, who fielded competitive playoff teams in the 90s, and in the summer by the Toronto Blue Jays, a team that had won back-to-back World Series earlier in the decade. Wedging in a basketball team was one thing, but getting people interested in a purple dinosaur-wearing basketball team that played in a stadium 5 times too big felt like a near impossible task. That is pressure. Carter brushed off the Jordan comparisons and continued to battle against the waning interest in basketball in the city. By now, you know the rest, especially if you're from here. His impressive start, cruising to the Rookie of the Year in a lockout-shortened 1999 season, only helped fuel the fire. His offensive package, even for a 22-year-old in the league, showed promise of an all-around star. The shot creation, the dunks, the highlight plays, the dunks, it all culminated in a true breakout season the following year. Carter led the league in all-star voting. He forced the hockey lovers and baseball fans in Toronto to shift their attention to hoops. The team, for its part, performed better. And that same all-star weekend, Carter pumped oxygen into a fledgling dunk contest by putting on arguably the greatest performance ever. A dunk contest performance that is etched into NBA history. He followed it up a couple weeks later by scoring 51 points against the Phoenix Suns in the Raptors' first ever nationally televised game. He went ballistic in March of 2000, averaging nearly 29 points, shooting 40% from 3, and having 1 steal and 1 block a night. It culminated in the franchise's first ever playoff berth. The following season, momentum kept building. The team was good. Carter was even better. It would turn out to be the highest scoring season of his 22-year career. The astronomical rate at which Vinsanity was ascending to stardom only helped raise expectations. Is he really the next MJ, and is the next MJ really going to play in Canada? A playoff showdown between Carter and Iverson only helped prove that Carter can hang with the league's very best, going toe-to-toe with the MVP, battling back and forth with historic performances, including 50 points in Game 3 in Toronto to help the Raptors take a 2-1 lead, and 39 in Game 6 to force a Game 7. We all know the rest of the story. Vince's graduation was scheduled on the same day. He said he wouldn't miss it. His teammates had some strange comments in the media about it, and despite Vince being ready for game time, it was the revolving topic around the game. Like most Game 7s, it was a battle, and all things considered, Carter played a pretty good game, even though he later admitted he was winded for the first bit. But we all know how that ended.
Carter trying to get free. Carter at the buzzer. No good. And the Sixers hold on and advance to the conference finals.
Still, even despite the loss, the Raptors knew Carter was good enough to lead a contender. They re-signed everyone that summer, including Carter, to a 6-year deal and brought in Hakeem Olajuwon to shore up the front court. A mistake. Still, with max money and max publicity comes expectations. Carter and the Raptors were no longer just a fun story for fans, they needed to show results. The next season, injuries derailed Carter's year, but not his stardom. He led the league in All-Star voting again, but had to miss the game and was eventually shut down for the season. It didn't help that when he was shut down, the Raptors galvanized, winning a bunch of games and squeaking into the playoffs, pushing the Pistons in round 1 before eventually losing. It also didn't help that Carter didn't join the team in Detroit in order to get treatment on his legs. It was a write-off and disappointing year for Carter and the organization. Still, expectations were bubbling, and now the voices grew louder. He got hurt again to start the 2002-2003 season. He spent the majority of the year hurt, and the Raptors were hurting without him. Still, fans were late to the party. They voted him to be an all-star starter. It only made things more poignant that it was set to be Jordan's final all-star game, and NBA pundits wanted him to step aside and give Jordan his starting spot. Carter made things more awkward than it should have been.
All-Star has just asked to be replaced in the starting lineup by Michael Jordan.
To add insult to literal injury, Carter got hurt again in April. Things continued to just spiral and unravel. Raptors GM Glenn Grunwald was fired after the 2003-2004 season. Carter was on his second coach, Kevin O'Neal, who got fired after just one season. And still, even at this point, there was a chance to maybe shift things in the right direction, to reaffirm to Carter that they're still interested in winning. They had just drafted Chris Bosh, a promising young big man. Maybe that would be enough to keep Carter happy. I guess not. Carter vouched really hard to try and hire Julius Erving as Raptors general manager, and that felt short too. Carter wanted input on who to hire as coach, and they didn't do that either. Carter wanted them to be aggressive in the summer and try to go after big-time free agents, and they stayed put, making some additions, but nothing sexy and life-changing by any means. You can debate whether a franchise should listen to their superstar, how much sway a star should have in decisions, especially when Carter had spent the last 2 seasons mostly sidelined, but it was clear by their actions they weren't interested in seeking Carter's opinion. They hired Rob Babcock as GM instead and hired Sam Mitchell as head coach. Just weeks before the start of the season, Carter officially requested a trade, and how management dealt with that was probably the biggest failure of this whole saga. They let it linger. It created open controversy for the media to consume. He got booed at the ACC, the arena he helped build. He told reporters he didn't want to dunk anymore. He apparently told opponents trade secrets during the game. And above all, he got hurt again. Instead of waiting until their star got healthy and recouped his value, the Raptors decided to trade Carter at his absolute low point. Think of it like this. You know Anthony Edwards, the hype and stardom that he has gotten over the last few years, face of the league type talk. Imagine if he spent a couple of seasons hurt. didn't go about things the right way because naturally he's a young player with the world in his hands, and the Wolves decide to trade him for a bag of peanuts. That's how absolutely baffling this whole saga was. It only made it worse that Carter was incredible once he got to New Jersey. He returned back to all-star form. He got his revenge on Toronto for years when he returned to the city. The city in turn resented him for it, scolded him with VC sucks chants every time they could, something he relished in. He hit game winners, he pointed to the crowd, he would childfully play with his former teammates only for them to get ejected. He and the Nets beat them in the 2007 playoffs as underdogs, and neither side, neither Carter or Toronto, ever really owned up to anything that happened. That Carter, this young player who received comparisons to Jordan, who introduced not only the Raptors to a new city, but basketball to a whole country, who ascended as a bona fide superstar as quickly as he fell from grace, didn't go about things the right way. The truth is, Carter wasn't mature enough to handle the pressure, the expectations, and power that came with all of those responsibilities. But it also didn't help that the Raptors front office was hit with the worst case scenario, with injuries, with botched signings and botched coaches, and failing to consider the voice of their superstar. But none of that mattered. Fans were too far gone. There is a really fascinating quote from Chris Bosh about this whole situation, which I think sheds light on fandom, especially when it comes to idolizing players. Because they loved him so much when he was here, it's a thin line between love and hate. That's the old cliche everybody uses, and it's true. We see that now today, how quickly fandom can turn in the world of social media. How you can be the prickly underdog one day, the fan favorite, and then suddenly the expectations that come with it turns you into a villain, or you become overhyped, or you fail to meet the moment. Sometimes as fans, we get caught up in the current day narrative that we tend to forget how we felt when it was all happening. When Carter was soaring to dunk the ball every chance he got, when he put up the most iconic performance in dunk contest history, when he dominated in the Raptors' first ever nationally televised game, Carter turned a purple dinosaur jersey into a fashion statement. He put Toronto on the map as a basketball city, and the trickle-down effect that caused is clear as day. Does that excuse the way things shook out 20 years ago? No, but time should heal that wound. Perhaps more than anything, Carter's story provides us an insight into what makes Raptors fans, and in part the city of Toronto, a little bit insecure. He is the root cause of the no star wants to come to Toronto idea that permeates across the fanbase. Carter left. Alonzo Mourning didn't even want to be here. Bosh left too. Lowry and DeRozan came, they stayed, they were applauded for it, and the franchise still had to maneuver to trade for a star that didn't intend to come there, cause a frenzy the entire season, only for him to lead them to a championship and still leave. So maybe, just maybe, with the 30th anniversary of this franchise this season, we can all do some healing. Accept the fact that the first 30 years of this franchise, for better or worse, was a result of the path Carter created with his brilliance. That some of those deep-rooted insecurities exist because of how that situation unraveled, but also that Toronto 30 years ago isn't Toronto now. It's one of the biggest markets in the league, one of the fastest growing cities in North America. And sure, the cold, the taxes, and it being Canada will always play a part. For the players who played here, or play here, including Carter, they know how special it is to represent an entire country. That's the selling point. Essentially, as the franchise turns to celebrating its first superstar, this is your chance to try and exalt any feelings you have about what the Raptors were for the last 30 years, and perhaps envision a future where that isn't the case anymore. A chance for you to forgive the past, embrace it, and move on to something better.
Thank you for that opportunity for 6 years. It all started there. I had some memorable moments with that organization, which created Vinsanity, which is why, without a doubt, I'm going to the Hall of Fame as a Raptor.
Thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, you can watch other video essays on our Raptors Republic channel. Make sure to listen to a few of our podcasts and also subscribe if you can.